passengers waiting to board us, so we will only be here for a few moments as we get passengers on board.
Really old bridge.
Once on board, I'll go through that safety announcement, the introductions, and we'll get into the commentary for today's talk. Thank you.
There's a rowing club. They'll see me down the rowing club.
That's the one, Roman walls.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like Roman walls. That looks amazing over there, Mina.
The door stuff's amazing, isn't it?
I think the train station is down there though, you know.
Yeah.
So, looks like it.
We're down the road.
School being one of the oldest in the world, dating back to 627 AD when it was first formed by Paul Linus, the first Bishop of York. Now this is a public school, meaning that it must be open to everyone, right? Well, not quite. Of course, by that what I mean is, as a public school, it's open to everybody whose parents have plenty of cold hard cash and can afford the fees that you'd have to pay if you were wishing to send your child or children to this particular school. Now, if anyone is contemplating this, let me warn you, these fees are rather eye-watering. Each year per child, it will cost in the region of around £30,000 to send your child to this prestigious school. Now, of course, that isn't including pocket money, folks, so you may need to dig a little deeper down the back of the sofa to help make ends meet. Now, of course, over the years, the school has housed a number of famous pupils, none more so than the first person we'll talk about. And when I say talk about, this is where I like to introduce a bit of that audience participation. I like to see who paid attention in history class. So I'll give you a few clues to this chap's identity, and we'll see if you can work out who I'm referring to. So firstly, this chap was born here in the city of York on the 13th of April in 1570. His father was named Edward, and his mother named Edith. But throughout his life, he would be known by a number of different names. And before anyone asks, no, I'm not referring to those type of names that you shout at the kids when you've just nearly fallen over their shoes at the bottom of the stairs. I'm referring to the names of Guido and John Johnson, of course. While studying at St. Peter's, it was said this chap was rather fond of three specific subjects. These subjects being religious education, chemistry, as well as politics. Now, it was his great love of politics, of course, where it was said this chap possibly wished to make a big bang within the world. And of course, if you're not quite sure from those few clues, the final clue I'll give you is this chap is probably best remembered on the 5th of November. Any ideas, folks? Well, of course, we are referring to the infamous Guy Fawkes, famous for the 1605 gunpowder plot. But did you know it is said this isn't Guy Fawkes' only claim to fame, as he's actually believed to possibly be the only person to have ever entered the Houses of Parliament with honest intentions. Now, St. Peter's School, over to the right, does in fact sit upon land that was formerly owned by Guy's father. This is before the land would be sold off as the school would expand over the years. Now, each year they do celebrate in the traditional manner by hosting a bonfire and fireworks spectacle, although they do draw the line at burning an effigy, as they do believe it to be, and I quote, bad taste to burn an old boy. So of course, folks, we're now coming to our first turning point on the river, and in a moment I'll be giving two by its record floods when the water here in the Ouse would peak at 17 foot 10 inches above regular river level. Now, to give you an idea of the height of the river at this time, look to the support structures on the bridge, where of course you can see horizontal lines that run down them. Or if you start from the underside of the bridge, and of course look to the second line down from the very top there, this will of course give you the rough height of the river back in November of the year 2000. Now, of course, due to the height of the river at this time, we had no sailings, none of our boats, and our fleet would have made it under any of the bridges. In fact, I think you'd have even struggled to get under there in a small canoe. But of course, the river did in fact get so high that we even had to have sandbags thrown into the city to shore up a number of York's defences. So as we spin the boat around for the first time, we are going to start heading back to the historic city centre. Now, of course, if we didn't turn here, we could continue in our previous direction for around another 28 miles, navigating the winds and turns of the river, eventually reaching the cathedral city of Ripon. But of course, this journey would take us around 9.5 hours, so maybe a little optimistic for the 45 minutes that was set aside for today's tour. Of course, on a much smaller vessel, we could attempt to make it all the way to London without ever going out to sea, simply navigating the inland waterway system. But of course, this journey would take us around 3.5 weeks. But as we have spun the boat around and start to head back to the city, draw your attention ahead and to the left. Maybe get your cameras ready, as you will get two very brief glimpses of York Minster. You first coming into view just around now, in between the tree line there. But as we pass this second larger tree, you will get a second and final view before the Minster disappears for the duration of the tour. So of course, as the Minster starts to come into view, you'll be able to see nearest to us, we have the two western towers, or naves.
Probably Brayford West
Standing
School.
just beyond that
I
is the
know.
great
Oh,
central
Western
tower.
Tower.
This
Bit of
stands
history,
a
innit?
whopping 213 feet tall, making it the tallest structure here in the city. It is in fact enshrined in an old bylaw that states that it can be built taller, or in fact closer to God, than that of the central tower of the cathedral. Built from magnesium limestone, or York stone, as it's commonly referred to here in the city. Now this York stone is in fact rather unique in the way that when we get the particularly nasty map for this, the local tourist information centre. But we are just about to leave the old medieval city as we're passing under Skeldergate Bridge, but I'll talk a bit about this on the return leg of our journey. As we pass under the bridge, let me draw your attention over to the left-hand bank, where coming into view will be a large coach and car park. This area over to the left is known as St George's Fields, and this has been the home and host of many a fair and fete over the years. In fact, it's been hosting fairs for well over 500 years and still does so to this day. But this large piece of common land to the left is also set up in the birthplace of York as we know it. Back in 71 AD, when the Romans arrived here in the city, they decided this area would be perfect to build a legionary fortress and to start their settlement. They would name this area Eberacum, which would translate as place where the yew tree grows. Now it's believed they chose this area specifically for its defensive advantage of having the dense forestry as well as rivers that would run along both of this land's sides, of course. We are cruising on the Ouse, and when we make our final turn in a few moments, you will of course see the mouth of the second river that joins us here in the city, that of the much smaller River Foss. Now also found along the riverbanks, folks, back in the medieval period, would have been that of an old medieval ducking stool. If you're not familiar, of course, this was a form of torture or punishment. Now, it was believed you could gain a short ride on the ducking stool if you were ever found guilty of the lesser or trivial crimes of being a barmaid caught serving short measures, a brewer of bad beer, or a baker of bad bread. It was also believed, controversial I might add, that you could actually gain a short ride on the ducking stool for simply being a nagging wife. Now, obviously, there was a more sinister use, as the ducking stool would have been used as a test for witchcraft. And if suspected of this, you would have been strapped onto the ducking stool before being submerged under the icy waters for up to 4 minutes. Well, if when brought back to the surface you were found to be no longer breathing, if you had in fact succumbed to the water and drowned, well, clearly, you would have been said to have been innocent, and all charges would be dropped. You would have been given a humble apology, as well as a Christian burial paid for by the city. Now, if by some minor miracle you did manage to make it back to the surface, and were still found to be breathing, coughing and spitting up the rancid river water, well, clearly, you would have been said to have been using the dark arts to sustain your life under the water, so you would therefore have been branded a witch. you would have been afforded a short period of time to dry off on the riverbanks. This was, of course, before presumably being burnt at the stake, so it was always advised to give the ducking stool a bit of a wide berth. Now, I would just like